Hello there and welcome to Community Life. You will talk with the community experts about their life journeys and learn from each other. And today we have a conversation with Jake McKee, a marketing and community professional who's been doing community before it was even a thing. Consultant, the founder and executive director of Dinner5, a photographer, and an incredibly proud dad. So, hello, Jake.
Thanks for having me.
Super happy to finally meet you. And I just found myself having this thought that when you started doing community, I was like, I don't know, I didn't even go to the school, but it's not about community right now. It's all about you. Tell me, how did you become a photographer?
So funny story. I was sitting in a bar with my dad on a work trip when my daughter's mom called and said she was pregnant, and and I'm not. This is no exaggeration. I'm not making this up to just have a great story. But this is literally 100% what happened. The moment, the millisecond that she said I'm pregnant, I had two thoughts. One was, how am I going to afford college? And the other was, I've got to get a better camera. And so I came home and did about a week's worth of research and went out and bought my first Nikon DSLR. Have been shooting a lot ever since. You know, I shoot a little slower lately, but anywhere from 10 to 30, 40,000 images a year, probably.
But I believe it was not the beginning, because if you had the thought that I have to get a better camera, so you've been doing it before.
To some extent, not. I didn't do a whole lot of. I had a little Fisher Price plastic camera. That took those like the little film canisters that had like two round circles and one bar that connected them. If you remember those little inserts. Um, and I took awful pictures of absolutely nothing. Wasted a bunch of money on film doing pictures that made no damn sense at all. But that was when I was a little kid. I didn't have a lot of interest in photography. I mean, I was interested in it, but then I kind of messed around a little bit. But this was, pre-iPhone days, pre cell phone camera days, and I had a digital camera at one point that was a 1 megapixel or half a megapixel or something. I mean, it was an Olympus. It was big. It was unwieldy. The images were awful. And I got it thinking, oh, this will be fun. I'll start taking some great photos. And um, I had it about a year before I think I gave it away to a friend or something. But it just took really pictures I just wasn't really liking. But I'll tell you what's in all seriousness, it was my daughter's uh, pending arrival that prompted me to say, yeah, I got to get good at photography, right? In order to do that, I needed a better camera than the little dinky one that I had. And funny side story to this, Nikon at that time was doing a huge push towards bloggers when blogging was relatively new. And they had a lot of really great events they were doing to encourage people to shoot Nikon. And I chose Nikon almost exclusively because every single person I knew, in my space, all the bloggers I knew, all the community people I knew, all the industry folks that were friends, they all were shooting with Nikon. And in no small part, they were shooting with Nikon because of Nikon's efforts to reach out and uh, to a relatively small group of people at that time. But I think they understood the community principle of you really focus on a small group that can move that message to a larger group, right?
Yeah.
And it was some great content. They were really partnered with Flickr at that time. When you do search by camera on Flickr, Nikon was the one that came up more than hardly anybody else. And they were just pummeling Canon. They've kind of lost that position these days, but uh, yeah. So it was also nice when I went to events and whatnot, and I could ask my friends, hey man, how do you use this feature? And they'd be, oh, let me show you. And, oh, okay, this is cool.
So basically, all of your friends had the same model, or you have different models.
Same brand, within a model or two. So I started with the D50, which was one of the lower end, entry level DSLRs, and uh, upgraded a number of times before I finally switched to Sony years later. But the mine was the low end. There was several people I was friends with that had some of the higher end ones, and I was pretty jealous.
I wonder what did Sony do for you to switch Nikon to Sony?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Yeah, I was a hardcore Nikon guy and had spent way too much money on lenses and camera body upgrades and the whole nine. Right, went from the crop sensor, the lower quality, went to the full frame, the higher quality professional style camera. And I, especially then, not so much now. It's sort of resolved itself, but I had a lot of neck and back trouble,
Mm.
and quite a bit of it, and it was causing. In part, it was a huge factor to why I was having really, really frequent migraines. And the very simple answer is I moved from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera, because the weight, everything about the Sony was smaller, lighter, uh, as good or better quality. The lenses were every bit as good, and then in some cases better, in some cases slightly worse, but by and large, very, very comparable lenses. The body was full frame, and it was super light and small. I don't know if you can see it now with my
Yeah, yeah,
background,
yeah.
but it's a relatively small camera. Still heavy, but nowhere near as heavy as the DSLRs that I was shooting with at that time. So when the Sony mirrorless really started to find its footing, I went into the camera shop at one point, and we got a really great camera shop here in Austin, Texas, and I kept asking about, how are you, people I knew at the shop that had known for years and had been shooting with Canon or Nikon. Almost all of them were talking about how they were now shooting with Sony. And I was saying, well, how come? You should tell me why. And they'd show me some features and some of the stuff that Sony thought about. And I was like, man, this is pretty smart. I like that a lot. And like any competitive environment, it's a leapfrog, right? So one year Sony's really ahead, and then Nikon comes in and jumps up, and then Canon jumps up. Nikon's been struggling on the keeping up game, but Canon's been doing a really good job competing against a lot of the other folks. But and of course, like a good camera shop, the last time I went in, I haven't been in a little while, and I went in and I saw one of the guys, and it's like, "Hey, have you seen the new Fujis yet?" I'm like, "Oh God, stop! I can't switch again. Too much investment.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
even want to hear what you're saying."
and nowadays, like you just have an iPhone and just have very good photos, at least from my point of view. I'm not a professional photographer, definitely. So what do you think about iPhones?
Um, so they went from being marginal to extremely good, and now I feel like they've gotten too tricky, and they're trying to do too much with some of the AI processing and whatnot, and it just utterly ruins a lot of the photos that I try and take that has any sort of inherent style. So if I put it in portrait mode and take a picture in their portrait mode with the right lighting for that mode
Hmm.
with that camera, it can look really great. I mean, some truly beautiful photos. And there's times when I see stuff that people post on Instagram stories or whatever, and I'm like, man, that is a gorgeous photo. Where'd you take that? Oh, it's just portrait mode on iPhone. Oh, okay. Or it's just the iPhone itself, right? Some really stunningly good stuff. But when I'm trying to do anything where I want to have any amount of control myself over how things are lit, um, it does a pretty awful job the last couple of versions, to the point that it makes me really angry when I go back and look at some of the photos that I take. Some of the auto enhancement features that you can't
Mhm.
really get rid of, because it's built into the phone itself. You can't turn it off. There's no option to turn it off, and can take a really interesting, moody light, kind of dark and moody photo and just utterly destroy it. And there's not much you can do to take it back, other than maybe take it into an editing program and hopefully fix it. But uh, it is, I do not understand why that feature wouldn't be allowed to be turned off. Uh, it's bizarre to me. And I'm hoping in the next version that, I hoped it in this last version, the iPhone 14 I hoped that they would do a better job. They actually went worse. I feel like they doubled down on some of that automation that just kills the style, just absolutely kills the style. It's as annoying to me as the the soap opera effect that TVs have when
Hmm.
you get them and they kind of hyper reality the look of it. But it as an art as an artist, right? It drives me nuts both on the TV and the iPhone because the TV soap opera effect utterly removes any of what the cinematographer, the director, the editors, the film crew, everybody involved, the hundreds of people that go into creating a film, they wanted it to look a certain way. So when you turn on that soap opera effect and everything feels like a hyper realistic soap opera, and it's just utterly uncomfortable for me to watch. I cannot do it. It just makes me mad that there's a feature that basically says, "Hey, we make TVs, and we're also going to kill any artistic choice that the people who created the content for this thing wanted to have."
I can imagine that somewhere in the future they will add like artist mode on, artist mode off, and then
Right,
you can choose what to
right.
do. But what do you
Yeah.
love the most about photography?
Um, Yeah, it's a good question. It's one of I've got several creative pursuits. The other one is scale modeling. So I make lots of little small miniature things. But the the photography for me has I've always loved. Um, in some ways, it's like this with with my work, with the scale modeling, with the interior design. I seem to be renovating houses for the last 5 years, so it's all about being able to see a thing in your head and realize it, to actually make it real. Photography is really interesting to me. It always has been. I remember my grandfather was an artistic guy. He, if you ever called him an artist, he'd slap you in the face and say, "I'm not an artist. I'm just a guy who makes stuff." Right? Uh, Different generation, but he would take up painting and get really, really good at it, and then be like, "All right, cool, I'm good at it. I'm going to move on to the next thing." And one of those things, when my mom was a young kid, teenager, and into her early 20s, he was a photographer, and he had his own dark room at that time. Of course, no digital way back then. He had his own dark room in one of the bathrooms he'd taken over in their house, and got really serious about it and took a couple of pictures that of my mom in particular that were just stunningly good photos. I mean, just capturing the light was perfect, capturing the emotion of that moment, capturing a moment in time, um, and being able to capture that kind of emotion for me, or to create it. Sometimes what was actually being felt in the way that an image comes across, very different things. But you're still capturing an emotion of some sort, right? Even if it's sort of created just for the frame. But um, you I shoot. Typically, I shoot old rusty stuff, or I shoot female models most of the time, and fashion and that sort of thing. And with both of them, there's a lot of elements that go into getting everything right. So the lighting has to be right, the subject has to be right, the model, in case of the models, the posing has to be right, the emotion has to be right. Where you place the model in the lighting, getting the lighting set up if you're doing natural light or artificial light. Uh, just finding all the way to pull all the elements together and to do it in a way that hasn't been done 1,000 times before. Part of why I like the old rusty stuff, that I can go into an old abandoned factory and find one of my favorite photos of all time is literally of a valve handle, the round handle that you crank to open and close a valve on one of those big, huge industrial pipes. And I shot it straight on and did some effects to it in production, in post production. Um, but it was just a really cool red valve with a
Yeah.
really muted background, and when you zoomed in on it, you found beauty in a place that didn't exist, right? And being able to create that same thing with people as well. Even if I'm shooting my brother's family with their kids just for some family photos, trying to create something that's a unique take, but also has 50 technical pieces that are happening all at the same time. It keeps my artistic and mechanical brain portions tied to each other in a good way.
You shared that your Irish family has a mantra, we show up for a family. And how
Oh
many
yeah, yeah.
times you were called to be a photographer for family?
Yeah, this so it's funny because it took a number of years before people just started ignoring me with the camera. It took me just incessantly bringing the camera to all the events every time and taking pictures constantly. Where my aunt, my mom, my cousins, they're all like, "Oh, I don't want to take my picture," and you just have to keep snapping. And this is so it's an interesting. This whole dynamic is an interesting one because we appreciate art in a unique way as humans, right? We love it once it's created and important to us. We find it utterly utterly non valuable, whatever the word is I'm looking for this morning, when before it's been created, right? One of when my grandfather passed away, he was a World War II paratrooper. Jumped out of a plane on D-Day. Just a very, very impressive guy. And so when he had his funeral, they did the three-gun salute, whatnot, and it was an amazing, beautiful moment. And to this day, I wish I had documented it. But bringing a camera to a funeral and taking pictures of that in that moment, it's really tough, if not impossible, right? But once it's happened, stunningly important to the family, right? Being able to look back on that moment and really truly remember it, not just have vague memories of it, but to be able to look at the photos and have that emotion captured would have been amazing, right? And you hear this all the time when you hear a news story and somebody took a picture of that incident, that thing that was happening. You'll inevitably get somebody or a bunch of people saying, "Well, what was that photographer doing? Why didn't they put down that camera and go help?" I mean, most of the time the answer is there was 15 people helping, and he was also doing his job as a photojournalist. But it's this weird dichotomy of on one hand we want this beautiful art to live through the ages. On the other hand, I don't want you to be around. Get out of my face. This is not the moment. But it's my belief is it's always the moment, right? And after back to your question, kind of what do they think about the photography and the family? I think everybody's really enjoyed it. And I've taken a couple of really iconic pictures of various members of my family, uh, including my grandmother who passed away and was wearing this little cute paper crown at one point. She was not the type to be playful. She was a lovely person, but she wasn't a playful person. And she was being playful in this moment. And I captured that. And it was still her. And just the look on her face was iconic, right? It'll live through our family history, right? And the only reason I had that ability to get to capture that photo in that moment was because I had the camera with me.
Mhm.
As photographers always say, the best camera you have is the one you have on you, no matter how lower quality it might be. It's, whichever one you have on you is the best camera you have. But also because there was a level of comfort that was created by sort of an incessant photo taking process for 10 years beforehand.
Yeah, totally. Ah, yeah, I feel like you are a family history maker at this point.
Yeah, and somebody needs to be right. That picture of my mom, I wish I had 50 more, 100 more like that of her to understand her young life, right? There weren't just photos, but there were beautiful art, right? That captured a real emotion in that moment, a real moment in time. And that's what I've always tried to do with my family is, yeah, when everybody gets at the family event, I'll try and take as many photos as I can of, just documenting who's there and taking some group shots and whatnot. But trying to get that out of the way in the first 20 minutes so that I can then focus on just kind of standing by until my grandfather does something silly or my aunt starts laughing or just something that happens that I can kind of capture more of who they are as a person. And that's the challenge for me is trying to capture with the rusty stuff. It's trying to find beauty where beauty doesn't commonly exist. And with photographing people, it's always trying to capture the real true essence of them in a way that's understandable to people that don't really know them. That's always the goal.
So let's start from the beginning. Tell me about your parents. Who are they?
um, who are they? That's all. That's a good question. I saw one of this on one of your other podcasts, and it was an intriguing question then and now as well. So my parents, Chris and Karen, wonderful people, very different people. Yeah, in a way that made them a really interesting pair in a lot of ways, but was always a a fun dichotomy, right? My dad. So I have one brother I grew up with, and he and I would always wrestle with my dad, and my mom always had the ability right before somebody got hurt to say, "Okay, that's it, we're cutting it off." And to my dad's credit, he immediately went, "Okay, cool, we're done," right? Because they knew they had that dynamic, right? My mom was a little more risk averse; he was a little more, risk acceptant. And we do stuff with him that would get to a certain point, and she'd be like, "Okay, too far," and usually he'd kind of go, "Okay, well, I'm listening. I'll stop now." So a really nice balance to the two of them, which in some ways I feel like that's been a huge part of my life, is trying to find balance between two worlds. Right, my career, my college degree were all about my college degree was product design, but I went to a school that didn't have a product design curriculum, so I kind of built my own, and it was equal parts design school and mechanical engineering school. And at one point, towards I think it was the last 2 years, I was basically taking graphic design classes and design classes in the morning, and mechanical engineering classes in the afternoon. Would have to kind of pause at lunchtime, sit under a tree, and sort of rejigger my brain to go from one world to another. That led, when I got out of school, and the web was on the rise. Web was blowing up. I was working for a web development shop and as an integrator or whatever you want to call it, right? But I basically we had a graphic designer that would design, and we had a programmer that would program, and I actually took both of their elements and put it into something that was holistic, right? So, I've joked over the years that my parents were sort of the source of that, because they were two very different types of people and personas, but they worked really well. It was interesting to see how they combined forces to create a greater whole.
And if we are talking about the risk, what kind of person are you?
Um, somewhere in both, feet in both camps. I'm not risk averse per se. I've made taken a lot of risks in my life. I'm not an adrenaline junkie, right? The idea of bungee jumping or something doesn't really appeal to me. I think there's too much logic in what could go wrong with that for me to feel all that excited about it. But I have tried to push myself to do a number of things, and when opportunities come up that are significant, like back when the Navy was doing an outreach program to bloggers when blogging was coming on the scene. They flew people out to the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, and you actually flew from a plane in San Diego and landed on the carrier, stayed the night, and then they launched you back to San Diego the next morning. And hearing, yeah, you can do this. You can go to an aircraft carrier and live out your seventh grade Top Gun dreams. I was like, oh, this is great. I got to do that. I was on the plane about to be, have the arrested landing where you go from, was it like 150 miles an hour to zero in 2 seconds? And as we got closer and closer to the carrier, I was going, what am I doing here? But it was fun. It was a great time, and be able to check that off my list. So somewhere in between, and I've always enjoyed the bleeding edge part of things, right? It's why I've been doing community for 20 something years, is because but at some point that was new and interesting, and there's always some sort of dynamic that play with community to me that is a new thing, right? There's something difficult that we're struggling with most of the time in community. But yeah, just that idea of doing doing web development before anybody else was doing it, doing community work before anybody else was doing it, being part of the rise of social media, which is I'm both proud and ashamed of that particular process. But these days social media is a blessing and a curse. But yeah, equal parts risk. It's definitely a calculated risk taker, I suppose, is probably the easiest way to put it.
And talking about social media, so your last post on Twitter was 14 years ago. So why did you stop tweeting?
Yeah, so I've also, I don't know if you saw my Facebook, but I also haven't really been active on my main, my actual Facebook profile for
Yeah.
2-3 years at least. And in many ways, both, I backed off both of them for similar reasons. I do a lot on Instagram, but mainly because it's photo based, and that's, I'm a visual thinker, so that's a lot more fun for me than other platforms. But Twitter, I didn't enjoy where Twitter was going, and I've been on. I signed up for Twitter within, I think months of it launching, and was an active user, active participant. And in many ways, the same reason I backed off Facebook was that I was seeing, I love great conversation. I love in-depth conversation. I love, political, social, philosophical debates. I've always said that the three things that everybody always said that we weren't supposed to talk about in polite company: money, sex, politics, and religion. Right.
Yes.
And I feel like, well, why would we not want to talk about those things? I guess that's four. Those are the most important things that society has to talk about. And if you don't get those right, then the entire rest of your human experience is problematic, right? So why are we not talking about those things? But when we started talking about them in a very tiny, minuscule amount of characters, it lost all value, right? And I think that there are times where Twitter can be really good in the way that it gets information across. I think in certain environments, some of the stuff we've seen in the Middle East over the years has been really impressive and important. But functionally, it just drove me bonkers, right? If I want to have a real conversation, I've got to divide it up into 15 different individual Twitter posts and create a thread out of it. But there's not really any good thread mechanism that Twitter has built in for that. So it can be a jumbled mess. And then people start coming in and commenting, and it just gets lost. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing, half the point I was trying to make, and it's scattered. It was so problematic. And I think that was around one of the elections, some number of years back. And I just didn't like how the conversation was going. And I said, okay, well, I still like the idea of connecting and staying connected with all these people that have either had a major or minor role in my life, but I'm still connected to them. It's wonderful. So I switched to Facebook, and it gave me a better ability to communicate in depth ideas, right? Sex, money, politics, and religion are all in-depth conversation things, not 140 character things, right? And so it gave me a chance to do that. And honestly, in the Trump era, social media became garbage. It became a black hole where intelligent conversation went to die. And I found myself, I finally I haven't turned off the Facebook profile because I have years and years of history there and contacts and connections, but I don't think I think I check in on it once a year or so just to kind of clear out messages and whatnot. But that's been about 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
Because I got to the point where I realized some of the people, if I describe them outside the context of what I really know about their beliefs in a social media realm, not in real life, in a social media realm, they tend to be different. What I know about them in that environment was so radically different than how I knew them as people in the real world. And, kind, sweet people who would give me the shirt off their back in the real world became people that I was disappointed, to say the least, by in the virtual space, where they were so often, all of us, myself included, succumb to partisan messaging, just angry responses. Some of the stuff that you don't want to hear the quiet part out loud with some of your friends sometimes, right? And in the context free conversation, right? There's things that I might say, I really like this political person, or I really like this particular religious issue or whatever, but without the context or the depth that you get when you have personal conversations, or that you don't even think about when you're talking to somebody in person. Without that context, it became a uh, really bad conversation, lacking value. Right? Uh, I wasn't changing anybody's mind. They weren't changing mine to speak of. It was just a way to double down, and the politics of this era that we're in are taking full advantage of that. Right? The fact that, in all seriousness, this isn't a joke. In all seriousness, when you're debating with somebody online now, you honestly don't know if they're a spam bot, a Russian troll, or a real person, right? And that's a legitimate issue that really bothered me. That I just didn't. I realized I was wasting my time and ruining friendships, and that part was just didn't feel good. So I backed off. I did go and set up another Facebook account, and only I haven't really followed anybody because it's really meant just for my scale modeling. So when I bought a 3D printer, the only way to get support and from the company itself for the 3D printer brand that I got
Yeah.
was through their Facebook group. So I was like, all right, fine. And so now it's all just me following and participating in scale modeling conversation. And I follow almost nobody because I don't want to ruin those relationships, right? I'm in a group and I ask for help, and somebody very kindly offers me a ton of help and just constantly supporting me. That's great. Then I go and turn to their Facebook page and I'm like, oh my God, that's what you believe? This is horrible. Horrible. Right. So, I've kept it as minimal as possible. There's still value in it, but in a very contained sort of way. Uh, and I've thought about going back to Facebook and trying to re-engage there and maybe kind of wipe out some of the old content and start fresh, but without starting a brand new profile. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm really disappointed in the direction that social media has gone. It's been taken advantage of by spammers and trolls and foreign governments. It's been taken advantage of by politicians that use our anger for their own gain. It's but I miss being there and seeing. I hear from people that I reach out to, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know if you saw this thing, very important life thing that I posted about." And I'm like, "No, I didn't see it." And, it does make me feel a little left out sometimes. I'll tell you.
How do you feel about LinkedIn?
Um, it's fun in some ways. I've been spending more time there than just about anybody anywhere else, just because it's for work purposes. But um, LinkedIn is interesting because it is so sequestered from some of the personal stuff. It stays above board, but there are times where this is an interesting podcast for me because we're finding out about the people behind the work, right? And I wish we brought more of that sort of thing to our full self, to our full life experience, and we'd spent so much time doing so much work. Sometimes you don't know who the people are you're with, and that's you want more of that. But so LinkedIn's LinkedIn. It's a place that seems to be sort of purpose driven for me around work things. But I was really happy. One of my community friends, Adrian Spear, posted about his new baby the other day, and I was like, "All right, this is great." And even he posted his message, said something about, "I don't normally do this. I'm sorry, but I'm just really proud." It was like, "Oh, this is great. I want to see more stuff like that." Right. And, but also, the flip side of that is it's nice to kind of keep it clean and business focused and not go, all over the place as far as, uh, this is a ton of information you now have to sort through. So it's tricky. I think we're all trying to figure out as a society how and when and where we share what,
You
how we
know,
share it.
I feel like LinkedIn is also like more and more personal stuff is coming there, and it reminded me a little an episode of South Park where people were connected to the big shop, something like kind of Walmart, and then they burned it to the ground. Like, let's support our locals, and then locals grow, 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 and then like
Right.
they finally burned them too. So I feel
Right.
like something similar is happening with LinkedIn because like it moved from professional more to like personal stuff, like kind of personal professional. And I feel like
Mhm.
it's what at some point, like some new social media will come and like people, oh, I remember LinkedIn, it was so good, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's all part of the process, I suppose. But,
talking about scale modeling, what is your favorite model?
um, it's probably the one I just finished. I'm trying to think back to the one. So I sort of joke. I had this great T-shirt that says, "I don't finish anything," but there's no G on the end. Um, and it's my perfect scale modeling because I love to learn the new techniques. I love to learn about the new, buy a new tool and try that out. My ability to get to the finish line and actually finish something before I've gotten bored, a little sketchy on that part. But I did just finish one that even though it's got some stuff I didn't really like about how it got finished up. It's finished, but it was an interesting project for me just because no, woo. Uh, it was an interesting project for me because I decided I started as just a way to experiment with a couple of techniques that I had seen somebody else do and was like, well, I'll try that out. And then that turned out pretty well. And I was like, well, maybe I can actually finish the diorama part. And I'll take a model that I started a while back and got about halfway done and then just got bored with it and set it aside. I'm like, oh, that'd be the perfect vehicle for this diorama. And I started building that and was like, well, I don't know. This one's pretty rough. I need to go buy a new kit and start over. And so I did that. But there was a bunch of new techniques that I tried on that particular diorama that all turned out pretty good. Took me almost 2 years to get it finished, and granted, there was two home renovations and a pandemic, and you know, moving into with my partner and her kids, and so a lot of stuff going on during that period of time, which is why it took a little bit longer than normally would have. But I also bought a 3D printer during that period of time. I was learning how to use insulation foam as a base for the diorama. I was doing some new weathering and painting techniques. I mean, like literally every part of it had some new thing that I hadn't done before, and I just kept saying, "Well, I know how to do that theoretically. I don't know how to do it actually. So let me go try that and see if I can make it work." And so it turned out pretty good. Shortcomings aside.
How do you choose what to try next, what to learn next?
So I'm I'm laughing at that because I have so many ideas and desires for so many different projects, um,
Okay,
and
how
it's
do you
so
choose
easy.
what not to try? Okay, how do you choose what not to try?
Well, so it's the same. It's really the same answer, right? I have a lot of desires, and I therefore start a bunch of stuff. I'm trying very hard to not start anything now that is not finished to completion, right? So, and part of my struggle, one of my scale model friends in the local community one time told me, "Hey, just get the kit, build it out of the box. Don't get any aftermarket add-ons. Don't get any replacement parts. Don't do any scratch building on it. Don't replace anything. Just build it straight out of the box based on the directions. Paint it, and be done." And I was like, "What? That is the dumbest idea. I don't understand why anybody would do that." So it was this fun conversation back and forth with the two of us. But I tend to see, oh, there's a really great kit. I've got an idea for it. I want to put it into this diorama environment, or I want to do this sort of weathering technique on it, whatever. Um, and I also love adding a lot of extra detail to it and making it as hyper realistic as possible. So, these projects tend to inherently be much longer than, oh, it takes 10 hours to build it out of the box. Great. I'm going to take 3 years to put all the stuff together. Um, so but I have a lot of ideas and not a lot of time. So I have a stack. I'm looking over here on the other side of the room. I have a stack of kits that, all of them, I have exactly the idea in my head of what they're there for and what I'm going to do with it. It's just getting to the point of actually finishing some of these things, finding the time to do it. And, as many creatives will tell you, sometimes the hardest part is just forcing yourself to sit down and stay in the habit. One of my painting friends always tells me you have to paint 15 minutes every day. Doesn't matter what you paint, you just have to sit there because you get into a habit of sitting there every day for 15 or more minutes. But
Yeah.
um, when I travel for work and I'm gone for a week and then I come home, it's so hard to get reconnected to the workbench and the work. And, sometimes I go and I do a shoot and I come home with 500 images and, just trying to sort through all of them to pick 10 that I'm going to edit is so hard. It's almost this overwhelm of, as my dad's always said, there's no greater burden than a golden opportunity. And when you have 50 golden opportunities, it's really heavy sometimes to just pick one and say, oh, get everything else out of the way, focus on that.
So, according to your website, you are Jake of all trades. So, Jake the builder, Jake the fixer, Jake the expert.
Yeah.
But tell me more about Jake the dad.
Jake the dad. That's a good question. So, yeah, I have one kid of my own, and my partner Lacey has two kids of hers as well. That we're all five of us under the same roof now. But the let's see, what's my parenting philosophy? I've tried really hard to create the strong independent kids who are also empathetic and caring, right? A lot of times you hear this strong independent thing, and it's strong and it's independent, but it's not necessarily kind. It's very you see some of this in the world out there where it turns into more of a selfishness that I think is important. I think it's especially for women, right? I'm trying to raise a strong independent woman who has an ability to advocate for themselves, stand up for themselves, to not feel beholden to the men around her, to get done what they need to get done, right? And I feel like I've done pretty good on that front. But I also am really proud of Elliot, my kid, because they are every bit as kind as they are strong and capable. This is a kid that when I told them at 7, I think, that if they got up themselves, did all their chores in the morning before school, made breakfast and made their lunch for themselves, all the stuff that had to be done before you went to school, then whatever time you had left, yeah, sure, you can watch cartoons. And they went, oh, okay, I get that. And so they'd wake themselves up, get themselves ready, make their bed, make their breakfast, make their lunch before I even got out of bed. And I'd come out and they'd be sitting there watching cartoons with their backpack on, right? Let's go. And all they had to do was turn off TV and stand up and walk out the house, right? But so very, very capable kid, but also very sweet and kind and caring kid, very empathetic and kind. And that's that balance, right? Maybe this is the theme for the podcast today, is that balance between the two worlds, right? That I have every belief that if they get into a struggle as they get out into the world, and here in 2 years when they graduate high school, just killing me a little bit, but I have every belief when they get out in the world, they're going to do great. And because they're capable, but also because they're kind enough to create and maintain relationships, to look out for those around them in a way that creates kindness outwards, but also creates generosity back towards them as well from those people that they do help. So, pretty excited to see where they go, and I'm trying to help convey those same messages to Lacey's two kids as well.
And what is the hardest part on this journey to bring in those values to your kids?
Probably. I think it's consistency. That'd probably be the first thing I'd answer, is the consistency, right? It is hard to be a parent sometimes, right? It is hard to continue to stay on the path when you've told them 100 times, you got to take your stuff upstairs when it's sitting on the staircase. If it's yours and you walk past it, walking upstairs, it gets to the point where you've said the thing 100 times and you just feel like saying, screw it, I'm just going to pick it up myself and take it upstairs. But the consistency, right? You got to stick to the message. Always looking out for moments of grace where you can give them grace where they've had a bad day and you just help them. But by and large, continuing the same things over and over again, over and over and over again. I think the other big piece that is difficult. I think for every one of us, every single person that has kids, who has ever had kids, some of the hardest part is sticking to what's good for them, despite what you may be feeling about your own history.
Mhm.
Right? We are all a product of our own upbringings, and everything I bring to parenting is based on the parenting I got. The parenting I got was inherently and then completely based on the parenting that my parents got, and on and on and on and on. Right? And and I think sometimes that the hardest part of parenting is just overcoming our built-in biases towards certain actions or non-actions or whatever. Right? So if I was really bothered by something my parents did, then I'm hardcore about not doing it. You're not having that same dynamic or that same reaction or whatever. And sometimes that's really great. It's how we move on. Other times it's what really holds us back, and we get stuck in. I don't know if I want to do that. I know consistency is important, but my parents were always riding me, so I don't want to be as hard with my kids. But where's that line between being hard but also being what they need, the kids want, need, and ask for indirectly most of the time? Structure. How do I give them that structure but not feel like it's so structured that I'm getting what I had trouble with? Right? It's sort of we're bringing so much of our own history to this
Yeah.
moment that may or may not belong there. And trying to sort that out, I think, is some of the hardest work.
You know, Jake, it's so hard for me to say because I feel like we just started our conversation, but I wish to have the sky as the limit, but time is the limit. So let's jump to the rapid fire questions.
Sure, let's do it.
Breakfast or dinner?
Oh, breakfast.
O-
Breakfast for sure.
Opera or U2?
Oh, you too. Favorite band of all time.
What are your favorite color and song?
Um, oh boy. Song, probably lately it's been Every Breaking Wave by U2, speaking of them. Color is probably this one on my background. I love this like tealish blue color these days. That changes regularly.
Got it. If you were a superhero, what superpower would you have?
Um, I think invisibility, maybe, just because I think it'd be the most interesting way to, as a community guy, being able to sort of see what's happening when you're not in the room would be fascinating.
Who do you learn from in the community world? Name one person.
Um, oh God, there's a lot of people that are spilling to mind. My friend Rich Millington's always putting out great content. He's kind of an obvious name. I think that there's a lot of really great people in the Dinner5 community that I reach out to on a regular basis. Nick Tolshev was one of them. Really great, very intelligent guy. I can send you these names and links and whatnot, so you can put them in the show notes. But some really great people there. Yeah, I'm overwhelmed with names trying to pick just one, but I've been very appreciative to Rich for a lot of the work that he's done for a long time for us.
And name two more people who I have to have this community life conversation with.
Good question. Um Nick for sure. Yeah, definitely pass you on to Nick. He's a great dude. Um, and oh God, I almost don't want to pick my favorite child out of the Dinner5 community. They're all such brilliant people. Um, I don't know. I'm gonna have to pick a couple more than two and send them to you, so
Okay,
you can choose.
got it. Thank you very much. And is there one question that I definitely should have asked you but didn't?
Um, yeah, I think the question to me on the community, especially on the community front, I've been thinking a lot about lately is, how are we taking care of ourselves? And as I've said for years, how do we, as an industry, advocate for ourselves better? And I've been asking that from a lot of community people lately: is how are you advocating for yourself? It's too easy for us for a love of the game, for a love of our communities, for love of the people in the communities. Uh, well, I've always said jokingly, half jokingly, moderate community from the beach, right? So we're on a family vacation. We're in a beautiful beach and blue waters and crystal clear, warm, beautiful waters on this beautiful beach with an umbrella drink in our hand. And we're like, hang on, I got to make sure that I moderate a couple of posts real quick because I haven't advocated for myself and demanded for myself. And this is an industry problem, not an individual problem. But I haven't demanded that there is somebody there for backup for me so that I can go on vacation and actually be on vacation and recharge. And, community work, as I've said for many, many years, is one of the most mentally taxing jobs that I can think of, for a lot of different reasons that we don't have a ton of time to talk about today. But it is a very, very difficult, mentally difficult job to do. And especially when we're so often alone in that within the organizations that we occupy. Even if we have a team, the team is usually very small, very underfunded, very understaffed. And in no small part, there are reasons for that, a ton of reasons for that. But one of those reasons is that we don't advocate enough for ourselves. And I think that it is high time that we start saying no a lot more often, that we start playing the political game because that's how we show up for our communities, not because, not feeling afraid of it or like it's not the right thing for us to be spending our time on. At the end of the day, if we don't play the internal political game at our organizations or with our clients, we're not getting done what we need to get done for our communities in the same way that most everybody else in the company is doing. And that's why, they're getting the budgets and we're not a lot of times. So, that topic has been a very big, if you ask any of the Dinner5 folks, they'll know that that's my hot button lately is how do we advocate for ourselves better? How do we advocate for our own self-care and our own mental health much more aggressive?
Yeah, I still have so many questions to ask you, so just get ready for the volume 2. And
Of course, I'm ready.
like I know you as a community expert, as the founder of this community stuff, I would say. But today I got to know you as a photographer, as a debater, as a father. So thank you very much for your time and thank you very much for being such an open and kind, interesting person. I loved our conversation.
Yeah, it was great. It was a good time. One of these times, somebody's going to have to put you in the hot seat and we get to know about you as well.
Some folks already did it. So just in case you'd like to do it, you can always tell me. I'm happy to do it. So yeah. And
all right.
See you in the community world.
All right. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. And thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, hit the like button or 5 stars and share it with your friends. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.